Good afternoon, and welcome to the Sustainable Cleveland 2021 Virtual Summit. We'd like to thank our host for the summit, the Cleveland Public Library. My name's Kathy Len. I'm the Sustainable Cleveland Manager, and you have joined the Circular Economy and Industry Breakout Session. Please remember to use the chat box for questions or comments and for resources to be shared during the session. Our moderator for this session is Terrell Cole. Terrell is Deputy Chief of Operations for the City of Cleveland. Terrell, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and welcome everyone to our session today. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-panelists. We're going to go ahead and go around the virtual room. Please say your name and the company you're with and your title, and then hand it right back to me. Dylan, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Dylan Beach. I'm a sustainability manager at Gojo Industries, which many of you may be familiar with as the makers of Purell, or if you've ever used our heavy-duty hand cleaners as you're grease monkeying around with your car in the garage. Good to be here. Thanks, Terrell.
Awesome. Michelle?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Yuan, and I am a Sustainability and Innovation Project Manager with Avery Dennison.
Awesome. Last but not least.
Excellent. Garr Punnett, here from Chief of Staff here from Rheaply. So glad to be here.
Awesome. So what I want to be able to do is set up our session a little bit, but I want to give us a little bit of context. So Kathy, if you can begin showing the slides. Want to walk through a little bit about where we are today and how our larger efforts are connected to today's session. So next slide. So as you all already know that we are part of Circular Cleveland, and that is our path on creating an inclusive circular economy. As you know that we have worked with many partners, particularly the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, in creating a process where we have a roadmap in creating that circular economy. The City of Cleveland has partnered with Neighborhood Progress and Neighborhood Connections to facilitate a completely inclusive process of engaging everyone from residents and businesses in order to create a roadmap so everyone in the city of Cleveland can participate in its success. Well, I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of great work is already happening. And so next slide, as part of our process, we engaged in canvassing the entire community, creating Circular Cleveland ambassadors and community workshops. And these workshops were absolutely reflective of the goals that we're trying to do as far as inclusivity. We had grassroots organizations, grassroots individuals, neighborhood folks, and businesses. And during those exchanges of information, we highlighted so many great things that are already happening in Cleveland. And so one of the themes that kind of weaved its way through and a lot of questions and challenges that people talked about was about an issue of scale. And so, so much of what we think about in the circular economy conversation is at that local neighborhood level, but it connects to a larger tapestry. And part of that is that we have to know which everyone is doing, which each group is doing. And right now is a great opportunity to see what our corporate community is quite honestly leading in this area of creating circular economies that make great sense for their business. So with that, we want to go ahead and get started with today's session. We want to spend a lot of time in asking all kinds of questions that you all may have. And so let's go ahead and get started with the first presentation. So I'd like to turn it over to Dylan Beach, the Sustainability Manager at Gojo Industries.
Thanks, Terrell. You can go to the next slide. So first I want to just talk a little bit about Gojo and what we do as a company, but focus really specifically on circular economy and sort of the enormously fast-paced, dynamic, emerging topic, and sort of how we have some initiatives that have been happening already and some of our future thinking. But first and foremost, Gojo Enterprises or Gojo Industries is a purpose-driven family enterprise. We're headquartered in Akron, Ohio, so quite local. And our purpose is saving lives and making life better through well-being solutions. And you see our founders on the left, Goldie and Jerry Lippman, and our current owner and CEO, Marcella Kamfer-Ralnick, who's a third-generation kind of family member, and Carrie Jaros, who's our CEO as of January of 2020, right when the pandemic started. If you go to the next slide. The company was really founded on a safer way to clean hands. Back during World War II, Goldie Lippman was actually a supervisor at a rubber factory in Akron that had been converted to make life rafts for the war effort. And she would have, her and her coworkers would have carbon black and tar all over their hands. And at the end of the day, they would just use what was available as common practice to wash their hands, with just dipping their hands in kerosene and benzene. And benzene is a known carcinogen today. At the time, that's what they used. But it was really horrible for their skin condition and as an exposure to a toxic chemical. So Jerry Lippman set out to invent a safer way to clean hands, which he did, launching the first original hand cleaner from Gojo, as well as inventing the first portion-controlled dispenser. So that's sort of our legacy, our founding legacy. And we carry that forward today, which is a theme that I'll come back to as it relates to circular economy in a minute. But if we go to the next slide. So many of you have probably seen some variation of the chart on the left. This is an adapted waste management hierarchy from the EPA, US EPA, which starts with like reduce, reuse, recycle at the top. And you see in the bottom levels of energy recovery, which is like, incinerating things or burning things, but capturing kind of the waste heat to make energy. And then at the bottom, landfilling or treating other kinds of waste. So at the top is what's most preferred, and at the bottom is what's least preferred. And the circular economy, this is just like reframing this old model and saying, we really, in a circular economy, we want to optimize the first two rows. Everything should be designed to use less materials, to be either reused or be capable of being recycled or composted, so that we're returning the materials back into circulation. Things can be used over and over again, kept at their highest, most optimal values as long as possible, so that we're not losing value to the economy for all these materials, which ultimately has environmental and social impacts as well, positively, to design more in that way. And I'll start with one quick example of, and this is by no means a sexy example. This is like the nuts and bolts, the kind of the in the bowels of the beast examples of inside a company, inside industry, of we have lots of components, plastic components that are injection molded. And if you're using a low quality injection mold tool, it's quite wasteful. There's a lot of process scrap that's just plastic material that's either thrown away, or you could reincorporate it into kind of the front of the batch for the next round, grind that scrap up and reincorporate it. But that can also lead sometimes to like lower quality components coming out at the other end if you use too much recycled content. So what we have done is gone through and started to look. We're looking at all 1,300 injection mold tools that are used on our behalf or in our own facilities, and seeing where can we make mold improvements or upgrade our molds to higher class molds that are more efficient, to eliminate waste, save on energy, because higher efficiency molds use less energy as well typically. And in this one example, this new injection mold tool, which we're upgrading, that makes this collar that goes as part of this refill, it's going to eliminate an estimated 75,000 pounds of plastic scrap each year. So it's plastic that was before this upgrade was just wasted. So it's like little teeny changes and improvements can really have a big impact. So if we think about if we look through all 1,300 of our tools, you can imagine how that plastic scrap reduction could really become kind of an impressive figure by the end of all that analysis. So we're working through that just as one example of reduction. If we go to the next slide, reuse is a big topic on in the circular economy kind of lexicon, and we've been piloting for some time. And this was paused a bit during our response to the pandemic, but we're picking it back up again. Is when we do an installation of our dispensers, for example, in a hospital or an airport, where you see a dispenser mounted on the wall or on a stand, there's a considerable amount of waste because those dispensers are packaged in corrugated boxes. They typically have a poly bag over the top of them or around them to reduce the likelihood of scuffing, so that they come out looking nice and new when you install them, so we don't have customer complaints and have to replace them. So we've created a reusable tote that you can nest these dispensers in, and when you're done doing the installation, it can fold down, ship flat, and it eliminates every bit of packaging that's used to install dispensers. So we piloted this actually in kind of the end of 2019 at Howard University, and it went really well. It went faster, had zero waste, and they could all be shipped back and reused. And when we think about this idea, it can actually expand even more broadly. So we're talking about how do we use this? Like we've already been doing a lot of this internally with kind of moving materials through our facilities and between our facilities, using reusable containers for that. But how do we do that with our suppliers too? So we're talking with some of our kind of local nearby suppliers that we do a lot of business with, that we have trips back and forth all the time. And if we use these reusable totes, we can eliminate like when you do the math over the lifetime of these reusable containers, it can be 98+% material waste reduction. Now, even though sometimes like this, a lot of the cardboard can be recycled, but it's a thing that has to be made. Recycling takes energy, so those trees that make up the cardboard that we can eliminate, they can still stand and don't have to be part of the supply chain at all. So we're excited about these types of innovations, and there's countless more that we could bring up to the table, but I'm probably already starting to go over time. So if we go to the next one, what's really important, and I think doesn't get enough talked about when in the conversations with circular economy, is while it's really important to think about how we are reusing materials, we need to think about ensuring the materials that we're circulating are safe. So we think about safe, then circular. And this gets into if you go to the next slide, we've had a strategy really since the founding, our founding on Safer Way to Clean Hands, but more recently, a very, very focused sustainable chemistry strategy for the last 5 years especially, has been to really advance sustainable chemistry in two main ways, which has culminated in quite a few of our products, close to 400 individual SKUs becoming Cradle to Cradle certified in 2020. And Cradle to Cradle we viewed as being the most robust product standard out there that a product can achieve. And our Purell hand sanitizers, the SKUs that have gone through, which covers over 80% of our sales from Purell, receive platinum material health certificates, which indicates that that's the highest level of achievement in Cradle to Cradle, which sort of indicates that our processes for choosing safe ingredients is really working, and that we're optimizing our formulas to be safe for people in the environment. We also had some soap SKUs certified to that same standard. But as I mentioned, if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned, these two strategies that we've had, or goals that we've had recently, the first was around reducing our chemical footprint by 50%. So there's an NGO-led initiative around using a long list of chemicals of concern, mapping your portfolio of ingredients against them, ingredients and impurities. So impurities being chemicals that you don't intend to use, they're just sort of ride along as a result of manufacturing processes or the like. And so, and trying to work on ways to reduce or eliminate those chemicals of concern. And so while our portfolio is a very clean portfolio, we have, I think, less than 10 ingredients that are considered impure or chemicals of concern. And I think 9 out of 10 of those are impurities that we don't intend to add. So over the course of 5 years, we had a goal to reduce the amount of those chemicals by 50%, and we exceeded the goal, getting to 64% per product use reduction of chemicals of concern in our portfolio. We had a secondary goal around doubling our global sales that come from products with third-party certifications, like Cradle to Cradle. And while we fell short of the target, mainly due to the technicality of how the metric is calculated in our kind of proliferation of some new SKUs during the pandemic to account for material component shortages, but that's a longer story. But we increased the percent of our certified products by over 25%, going from 34 at the start of in 2015 to close to 60% at the end of 2020. And what this does is, through these two approaches, is with reducing chemicals of concern, you're reducing the bad stuff in your portfolio. So that's the kind of the red bars in the chart on the right. As you go forward and you're doing this reduction work, you're getting rid of some of the bad stuff. And then with the certification goal, the certifications really indicate what you should be using that's good. You should be using bio-based ingredients. You should be making formulas that are biodegradable. There's packaging elements, like packaging should be recyclable. There's all these attributes in the certifications that, as you adopt more certifications and more of your sales become certified, it's an indication that you're actually making products that are becoming more good. So through these two initiatives, we're pushing our portfolio over time towards the right on this chart of getting all the bad stuff out and making sure that what's left is good. And in the perspective of a circular economy, this is what's important, because what we want to be involved in that economy and circulating is all good stuff. That's the goal. And so through continuous improvement and our making sure that we're working with our suppliers to identify the best, safest ingredients that science tells us today is safe and effective, and working with our material suppliers to make sure we're using components that are safe and effective and can cycle in a circular economy, we get to that destination. And one reason to do this, other than the circular economy is kind of the right thing to do, to address plastic pollution, to address climate change, and all this host of issues. If you go to the next slide, is that customers of ours are really demanding it. So we're seeing, especially retailers, really starting to adopt more aggressive stances on safe circular products. So this example is looking at Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly program, which, if folks aren't familiar, it's kind of actually pretty cool. When you go on Amazon, there's a little badge underneath the price and the kind of the title of the product. And if a product is Climate Pledge Friendly, meaning it aligns with some of the criteria that they've set, then it gets badged with this Climate Pledge Friendly, and people can filter for it. And so our products, by virtue of having certifications like Cradle to Cradle or UL Eco Logo, those third-party certifications align with their program, their Climate Pledge Friendly program, and make our products eligible for it. So they can get kind of search results that are filtered through this program, or in the future, they might even get prioritized over other search results because it helps Amazon advance their initiatives around their climate pledge. So we've also seen Walmart launch a new kind of better products platform. I think it's called like Build Better or something like that. That also does a similar approach of using third-party certifications. So there's tons of reasons why it makes sense for a manufacturer like Gojo to start getting more involved in this space and making our positions known and communicating about it through third-party, unbiased certifications. That's kind of the end of my talk. If you guys have any questions specific to Gojo, especially or circular economy in general, I'm happy to address them. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dylan. That was great. It's a great overview, and really sharing the approach and how the philosophy changed. Again, as Dylan mentioned, if you have any specific questions, please use the chat. We'll be going at the end of each person's 10-minute presentation. We'll be referring to the chat and then facilitate questions there within. So up next and ready and raring to go is Michelle.
Great. Thanks so much, Terrell. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I think we are ready to dive right into the presentation. So if you can advance the slide. So before we dive right into the content, I want to do a quick intro in terms of who Avery Dennison is as a company. So we are a global material science and manufacturing company that's really focused on designing and manufacturing labeling and functional materials. So our global headquarters is in Glendale, California, but our regional headquarters is right in Mentor, Ohio, for the labels and graphics material division that I support. So our products are in every major industry, essentially, and will be in a lot of different products that you're used to and familiar with in your day-to-day life. So for example, if you're going to the store buying a bottle of shampoo or picking up a package of blueberries, there's most likely a label on it. So those are the kind of materials that Avery Dennison makes. All right, and jumping right into the next slide. So sustainability is incredibly important to us as a company, and I'm actually really proud to say that sustainability is one of our core 8 values within the company. And as a part of that, it means we have to continually push up our ambition level for our sustainability goals. So we have 2 sets of sustainability goals, one for 2025 and another that we recently announced for 2030. So as a part of our 2025 goals, we have everything ranging from a goal for products and solutions to have 70% of our products and solutions offering more sustainable benefits, to things like where we're sourcing our paper from, what kind of chemicals to use, what our greenhouse gas emissions are, waste, people, transparency, and films. So I'm not going to dive too deep into those since I want to be conscious of our time. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on our 2030 goals for the purposes of this presentation. So our 2030 goals were really created to, again, up the ambition level for what we're trying to do. And it's really built on and complements the previous 2025 goals that we set. So our 2030 goals really can be divided into 3. So the first is deliver innovations that advance the circular economy. The second is really reducing environmental impact in our operations and supply chains. So this really refers to what we're doing within the 4 walls of Avery Dennison. And then the third is really being a force for good. So that means creating value for all of our stakeholders. And that means our employees, that means our customers, and that means our community and where we operate. So in terms of what we're doing around circular economy, we're also part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's CE 100. So we're really committed to helping society transition to a circular economy. So the vision is to, I guess before we jump into that, really thinking about how we transition from our current linear model to a circular model. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it means right now in our current status quo, we view things in a linear model by taking resources to make goods that are oftentimes designed for short periods of time for use, or really single use before it's turned into waste that goes to the landfill. So as we're going through that material flow, it's incredibly wasteful because it's the material of the products, it's the embedded energy that goes into making that product, it's all of the labor and time that we're investing to make that product in the first place. So what if we were able to swap up that system and really rethink how we do things and recapture the material so that we can prolong the life of a product? Or ultimately, the end goal, what if we're able to get rid of this concept of end of life for a product altogether, and we can loop it back into a feedback, into an input for another kind of product or another type of system or solution? So that's really the ultimate vision. So today, for today's presentation, we're really going to talk through in terms of how Avery Dennison is approaching this and where we play to support this transition to the circular economy. So Avery Dennison is really looking at it from a couple of different angles. So the first is, how do we invent and make materials that can move through the current recycling system and really support that transition to circular economy? The second is, how do we generate market demand for circular products, for things like recycled content, so there's some kind of economic incentive from the marketplace so that it's really, from a long-term perspective, economically feasible and economically sustainable. And then the third is, how do we deal with the current challenges we have right now physically? So physical networks, infrastructure, the logistics of moving where materials are to where it's needed. Because one of the challenges now is that a lot of times the materials that are treated as waste that can be used in another input process are located at different locations. So how do we make it so that the system is a little bit more seamless and it's not so difficult to move things from a manufacturing process, from one end of the country to the next? And with that, I'm going to move to the next slide here and talk a little bit deeper about our 2030 sustainability targets. So all of the goals that we saw in the previous slide, all 11 of them are actually nested goals. So there are sub goals within each of them. So for today's conversation, again, I'm really just focusing on that advancing circularity goal. So our goal number 1. So within this goal, we have 4 different sub goals. So the first is a commitment to have 100% of our standard products that will contain recycled or renewable content. So again, this goal is really supporting that market demand for recycled content, which is critical in terms of how we build up to circularity. And the second one is really about labeling for circularity of plastics. So that means having products available in every region that really enables recyclability, compostability, or reuse. And this means that we can enable other products and other end products to continue to move through that recycling system and to enable us to get more of the recycled content that's needed as input for a circular system. So I'm going to come back to intelligent label a little bit later. But the other one I wanted to cover now is matrix and liner recycling. So this goal here is really about our continued investment and collaboration within our industry and with our customers and brands to really look for recycling solutions and outlets for our industry. So a lot of times in manufacturing processes, there are byproducts that are really that cannot go through a traditional recycling system. So for pressure sensitive adhesives, this is the situation as well. So we're working with our partners and we're looking to understand how do we fix that bottleneck from a physical infrastructure and logistics perspective? How do we help enable it so that we can scale these kind of solutions and outlets for our entire industry? And so coming back to this concept of intelligent label, the fourth one underneath this goal, what exactly is intelligent label and what does it have to do with circularity or recycling? Well, so intelligent label is, if you pick up a bottle of shampoo and the label has information on it, right? But what if the information goes a little bit deeper? What if we're able to communicate more information on a label in a way that's that can help optimize systems or tell a different story? So one of the biggest challenges we have within the circularity space and the recycling space is how to sort through all of the materials that we currently have. So as packaging continues to change and gets more sophisticated, there's more types of packaging now available. So this is problematic because when the recyclers come to pick up your curbside recycling, it's all in one box, right? So the single stream recycling has to go to a recycler, and the recycler has to be able to tease out what are materials that are similar, what are materials that are different, and how to process each of them, because different types of materials require different processes to recycle, and they also carry different market value. So for the recyclers to be able to get back that value, they have to be able to separate things out. And right now it's done very manually and in a very tedious process, and sometimes not at all because it's so difficult to separate out each of the different types of materials that are moving through the process. So what if we could create something like an intelligent label, a label that can send a signal to a computer that says, hey, I'm a PET bottle. You can reuse me in these kind of applications. You can separate me out and sell me for X amount of dollars on the on the resin market. So if you're able to add that layer of intelligence, you can do a lot of optimization. You can also do a lot of automation in terms of how you're sorting that material. All right, and if you can go to the next slide. So as we've kind of talked about the Avery Dennison approach to circularity and what we're doing to support circularity, it's really a pretty wide approach. There's also a lot of other things that we're doing around circularity and sustainability. So we wanted a really easy way to communicate that to our customers. So the way we're doing that is through creating a portfolio of products called Sustainable Advantage. So our Sustainable Advantage portfolio is a centralized location that lists out every single one of our products that can help by providing some kind of sustainability benefit. So they're broken up into these 5 categories. So enables recycling, reusability, or compostability, contains recycled or renewable content. Both of these will directly support, that transition to the circular economy. We also look at things like reduction in the use of material, responsibly sourced materials, and of course, products that really provide additional methods to, that provides additional environmental impact and benefits during the use phase. So if you go to the next slide here, is a quick example of one of these products. So one of the challenges we have right now with the recycling infrastructure is if a bottle goes to a recycler right now, a lot of times the adhesive, the sticky part of a label will essentially gunk up their material process and prevent the machinery from working correctly. So this can be really problematic because it means that these recycling operations essentially have to shut down their operations to clean the adhesive out. So one of the solutions we created is it's called Clean Flake, and it uses an adhesive technology that you can remove from the bottle. So if you go to the next slide. So this is just a visual of how that separation process works. So with the Clean Flake adhesive, when the bottles are ground into flakes, essentially the flakes will go through something called a caustic bath. So during this caustic bath, the labels and the specially formulated adhesive will essentially separate out from the bottles. So that means that the bottle flakes, the PET flakes, will naturally sink, and the label and the adhesive will float. So that means you can separate the two out, and that recycled PET flake can be reused to make something else. So that means it can go into a new bottle, it can be made into plastic lawn furniture, it can be made into a wide range of things. So recently, BCG did a study that found that by 2025, the marketplace will have a shortage, a 45% shortage of recycled PET content based on the current brand commitments that we have from the large national brands across the world. So this is hugely problematic because even right now, even if brands want to use more recycled content and they want to be more circular, there is a supply constraint. So what can we do to help that supply constraint? And make sure that there's enough supply for the people that want to use this supply within their products. So this is one of the ways and one of the products that we like to highlight within our Sustainable Advantage portfolio. And if you go to the last slide here. So another one of the really cool products I always like to talk about is part of the Rcrush range. So this is a really interesting product because it basically takes it takes agricultural waste and creates labels out of it. So for example, citrus waste or barley waste from processing different agricultural processes are taken to make the labels for different wine bottles. And so not only are we able to provide a really beautiful looking wine bottle for or wine label for brands that are interested in sustainability, but it also ties into their core company and core business models, right? So having things like if you're able to provide agricultural waste feed into another agricultural product. So with that, I'm gonna close out the presentation and pass it over to Terrell. All right, go ahead, Garr.
Just like that. Thank you, Michelle. So I'm actually going to have everybody envision what slides would look like for Rheaply. We had a little bit of a miscommunication on our end. And so that means we get to look at a lovely Rheaply logo, but I'm going to talk more about what Rheaply does and how we're envisioning a more circular economy for the future. When it comes down to it, Rheaply's trying to solve kind of a different problem than we're used to in sustainability. Typically, we're looking at consumer products, trying to be more sustainable in the actions that we're having towards creating consumer products and the relationship that we're creating with consumers. Our consumers at Rheaply, our users, are a little bit different. So when we think of Rheaply, we're often addressing a large market that has to do with our enterprise users. So our enterprise users might be large Fortune 500 companies, and they actually have an incredible amount of waste that are within their own operations. So believe it or not, there's actually a number that Ellen MacArthur Foundation put together where through their research, they found that around $630 billion worth of commercial assets are sitting within our large manufacturing partners, technology companies, governments, whatever sort of large institution you might have around you or near you, they likely have some commercial assets that are sitting idle and not being used. So that could look like electronics, that could look like furniture, chemicals, manufacturing equipment, or even lab equipment that are sitting around and not being fully utilized, either in warehouses, storerooms, in closets, on shelves. And so Rheaply's actually take on a circular economy is how are we connecting those types of assets to extended life cycles? So how are we connecting either internal departments to one another or connecting communities to one another to find new use out of these assets that are perfectly good? So stick with me on keeping sort of imagining what that type of environment looks like. And then you can start to imagine, well, what type of systems do we currently have that governs those types of systems or assets? And from here, we've got legacy systems. So we might have older manual processes where people are writing stuff down and keeping track of it in literally a paper ledger. We've seen that before. We might have overburdened teams that work in surplus, that work in inventory management, or some sort of department that is constantly overwhelmed by the amount of flow of assets that companies consume and use in their daily operations. And typically then those teams try to build their own digital systems. So they're trying to create either homegrown systems in which they hire a team to code solutions, which are great, and we fully encourage those, but it generally means that those homegrown systems are hard to scale internal to the company, just because really building tech to scale is difficult. Or teams are simply using spreadsheets. And we love spreadsheets. We all use them in our daily lives, but you know that as soon as you add one more person to a spreadsheet, data can be hard to track and make sure that it's accurate. And then as soon as you start adding more and more data into the spreadsheets, actually managing these types of assets within spreadsheets becomes difficult. And so in that way, that's what Rheaply is trying to replace. We're trying to replace those homegrown systems, replace the manual efforts, and really make sure that we can connect our organizations internal to their own operations, but then also connect them to the communities. And that's really the theme of what Rheaply is going to be providing. The result of which is all about driving down procurement costs, driving sort of connected departments within large organizations. So it may be no surprise to anyone who's listening that someone in the research department isn't talking to anybody in procurement outside of what they need in order to do their research. No one's also talking to surplus often enough to understand what they have going outbound. And so we're helping try to connect those dots so that a researcher can say, hey, I'm looking for this piece of research equipment. A procurement specialist can say, actually, you don't need this new one because we have one in storage that actually is available for you to use, and then connecting those dots through surplus. In all, this actually saves a significant amount of time and money for our organizations. And then we see that actually end up resulting in lots and lots of tons of waste diverted from landfill, as we can actually better connect dots through the simple stuff like chairs and tables, or even infrastructure like lighting fixtures or ceiling tiles, to make sure things are actually ending up getting more used internal to their original use at the organization that purchased it. And so in that way, we manage what is hard to manage. So finding the right assets and connecting those colleagues to one another. We're sort of listing that inventory and making sure that people have a marketplace to turn to. And so in that way, our offering becomes that internal marketplace. Our software becomes that internal marketplace, where we can actually help our users connect to their colleagues and their peers and say, hey, I'm looking for this. And you can often think of us as an enterprise level, an enterprise suite, Facebook Marketplace or eBay or type of much, much, much better looking Craigslist, where we're really connecting peers and organizations to one another, and then really helping them get the most out of the stuff they already own. And so in that way, our job is to always be diverting items away from storage and then into opportunities for reuse. So we don't want things to go to storage, because if they're going to storage, it means their utility is actually diminished. It means that things are sitting around and actually not being fully utilized. And what often happens when things sit in storage is people start to question its use, or where did it come from, or its ownership. And then when those questions start to really pile up, someone eventually goes, you know what, I guess we just don't need this thing, and it's not worth anything to anyone, so we might as well throw it away. And so when someone actually comes to that conclusion that it's not worth anything, that's when Rheaply actually can be of service and of help, because we help make sure that we're making those connections to prove that it might in fact be worth something to someone in your organization by getting better visibility on that asset, or making sure that someone actually knows that that asset exists in the community so it doesn't needlessly go to landfill. And again, we do this all through what we call our Asset Exchange Manager. And this is our platform that helps track and list what is available into an organization, helps connect colleagues to that value, recapturing that value before it's needlessly thrown away. And then in all, this is meant to save money, improve efficiency at these large organizations, make smarter purchasing decisions at these organizations, boost collaboration between colleagues, increase those operational scope 3 type emission reductions, and then expand overall the network and the reach that you have in your community. I am so looking forward to talking more to the other panelists and answering any questions. And so thank you all so much for giving me the chance to speak about Rheaply.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, and Michelle, thank you for stepping in as an ad moderator, passing it off to Garr. That was deft technology switch up. As you know, from time to time, we have these hiccups. I'm blessed to have such a group of panelists that can step in at any moment. So with that, I want to thank you all again for your presentations, an introduction to what it is that you're doing to reduce your, in a sense, your footprint, and create opportunities not only for your company, but in Garr's case, for other members of the community as well. So with that, I want to be able to first honor our chat, because while it's fresh in everyone's mind, they have some very specific questions for your presentation. So first up, we have Andrea. She loved the use of reusable containers for Gojo installations. She says it's a great idea. Do you charge a deposit for the shipping container to make sure it's returned? And then also, do you? Well, let's just have you answer that first question, and we'll do the second one.
Yeah, it's a great question. And these types of questions is the reason why the solution isn't live right now, is because we were figuring out all the logistics of how to keep track of these things. Because if you have, like, especially if you roll this, you kind of integrate it back through your supply chain as part of the whole process, then you could have thousands of these things out there, and you want to make sure you get them back. And how do you inventory them and catalog them in your own inventory when they're waiting to be filled? So like we were figuring out all that stuff, and then COVID slammed into us, and we were like, all right, we got to make sure our supply chain resources are focused on getting product out to people. And so a deposit is one idea. I think we've looked at like also RFID to be able to actually real-time track where they are. And Michelle's nodding because we'd probably be leveraging one of their tags. plans to accept them back, if I'm reading that correctly or interpreting it correctly, yeah, the intent is that these would all come back, and we'd be getting at least 30 turns on like that plastic container, which would be designed to be recyclable at the end of its life, would be able to do 30 different installations or more, depending on how the actual durability holds up. And internally, we've got some scoped work to be doing this we have our own vertically integrated precision molding kind of outfit that does bottle blowing and injection molding for things. And so when we make a finished bottle or a finished component, plastic component like a pump or something, that they would be in these totes and be transferred between facilities, and those containers would just turn 100+ times before they have to be retired. So reuse is the idea there. Trying to do that as much as possible to reduce waste.
Awesome. So, Michelle, the next question is for you in response to your presentation. So, again, Andrea, she said that there are some really interesting ideas with respect to labeling that you guys are doing over at Avery Dennison. So, anything being done to shrink the size of labels across the board so there are fewer resources used overall?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question. And one of the major focuses that we have within the Sustainable Advantage portfolio is reduction. So it makes sense intuitively, right? When you use less resources, there's less environmental footprint. So the way we do that is typically through thinner labels. So that way you're not getting a change in the look or feel of a end product or bottle. So it doesn't change packaging design. However, you're using less resources and you're still able to achieve the same kind of end goals. There's also other things that are being done. So there's different ideas, innovative ideas about potentially how can we remove other components? Are there ways to directly apply labels, things like that? But there's a lot of work being done there. And, I think one of the really interesting things that I haven't thought about before, moving into this space, though, is also the application of it. So a lot of times when the labels are on the manufacturing lines or on the machines and being put onto the bottles or the substrates, it's going really, really fast. So there are some kind of engineering constraints around what we can do, because if you make something too thin, it can also be difficult to apply, based on speed or different applications, if it's, for example, for hand applications. But yes, it is being looked at.
Excellent. And I'll kind of go back to Dylan real quick, as this is like an amended second part of the question. The plastic containers that Andrew is referring to were the bottles that you place your product actually in.
Yeah. So this is a kind of I'll start really quick by just saying, in a circular economy, plastic is okay provided it can circulate. And what it asks you to do is say, how can you increase the amount of recycled content that you're using to hopefully be using only recycled content to kind of get away from using fossil fuel derived virgin plastic. That's part of the goal is to get away from fossil inputs altogether in a circular economy. So we are exploring using recycled content. We have in our industry, in the hand sanitizer category, there's some limitations around an FDA guidance to not use recycled content in over-the-counter drug products and drug product packaging. So we're kind of figuring out what that means for us and what our opportunities are, given that guidance is out there. Because hand sanitizer is an over-the-counter drug product regulated by the FDA. In terms of reuse, so we have a plastics and circular design work stream as part of our next sustainability strategy starting up, and we're scoping lots of product projects to really look at what's the future of our single-use bottle. We'll probably have single-use bottles for a long time. Because that's the dominant kind of business model today, but we're looking at ways that we can challenge that, and we're looking at ways that could we incorporate reusable packaging other alternative materials that would be more suitable for lots of reuse because they'd be more durable. But there are some limitations around the kind of the same FDA quality requirements and over-the-counter drug product that we are exploring and trying to, see what's possible for us and see how we can influence to make things more possible.
Excellent. And so,
Oh,
Garr, we're
Anon has a
you.
question that's the exact same thing, basically saying,
Yeah.
are they recyclable? Yes, the bottles are recyclable. They're clear PET, number one plastic. That's one of the most desired plastics that's in the recycling stream. So you would just remove the pump, and we're actually exploring ways to make the pump recyclable too. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Wonderful. No, sorry about that, Dylan. You have great anticipation skills. So I think you saw on his question. So Garr, we're gonna connect you with Ellen's question, and really it's around when we start thinking about sustainability. When we first started kind of talking about sustainability, at least in this conference, historically we always talked about the triple bottom line, and there is obviously a large focus on the environmental impacts and the social good. But at the end of the day, right, there are accounting needs, right? It has to also make business sense. A lot of what Michelle and Dylan had talked about also are about reducing costs, and it's part of this. And so, you have profit margins from the industry standpoint. So Rheaply is doing this internal marketplace and really looking at the cost of these assets and then potentially passing these on even externally. How do you consider the accounting practices, movement of these assets, right? Amortization and depreciation costs.
I love that question. And if that came from Ellen, frankly, I'd just love to connect. So hit me up on LinkedIn. But because ultimately I am quite frustrated with depreciation in general, because ultimately it can sometimes even be arbitrary to whatever accounting practice a client is trying to adhere to. So I could be sitting in a chair right now that has technically been depreciated off the books, but fundamentally has all of its use still intact. So what does that actually mean from a reuse standpoint to sell that item? I don't have the answers on that. And I think that's actually the industry doesn't have the answers on what that means. And it's almost bizarre to think, I've had so many conversations with organizations that say they have 1,000 chairs that they use it in their operations, and they're not worth anything. Well, things are worth when they have utility, and when you sit in them and they actually can perform their function, therefore it's worth something. So I think this is where we need to start redefining these traditional economic models and start really thinking critically about how do we change those practices so that we can encourage a more sustainable future.
So in the area, kind of a follow-up question for all of you, you can take a stab at it, is as you're kind of looking at metrics to either justify the investment, or at least the ROI of the investment, do you track things like opportunity cost or cost avoidance? Because now this have the secondary use. I mean, really kind of baselining how you operated before, all the factors of production before, and whether you're substituting a particular part or avoiding a particular cost. Do you track that in a way in a dashboard to kind of really kind of talk about the 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 year either cost avoidance or revenue generated?
I'll take that, and then hopefully my peers can take that as well. Is for us, that's our sell. So when it comes down to it, we can, depending on the size of the company, multiple X their investment in us. And so, any one of these types of assets that we're seeing, this might be something as simple as a school desk, something that a student, we just did an opportunity with a school in order to gain more opportunities for the school system. And we're talking roughly 500 desks equated to about $80,000 worth of savings. So these actually weren't just desks. It was small student chairs, some hexagonal desks here, some teacher desk there. But 500 items now are $80,000 worth of savings that can go towards further use in the school system, as opposed to where it was going to go, which was in the dumpster. And so in that capacity, it's all about the ROI. It is, hey, what you invest in us, you're going to see multiple times back. And we can continue to invest in that use case, the community. It really becomes a student play, a community play to say, hey, you're being more efficient as a school system now. So how do we actually increase that across the other clients and then communities as well?
Anybody else want to take a stab at that one?
So I think another thing to kind of keep in mind is, obviously the ROI is really important, and every business will look at that when you're looking at justification or business justification in an investment or on a project. But a lot of times, part of the challenge is that traditional ways of cost-benefit analysis and the assumptions that goes into the economic modeling of cost-benefit analysis, it doesn't take into account externalities. And sustainability is all about externalities, right? It's the part of the problem is that when I go to buy, a product, the cost of the environmental impact is not calculated in there. So by very definition, sustainability as an industry has been left out and off those books, right? So what we're all doing as sustainability professionals is trying to figure out, how do we get it back on the books so it's paid attention to? If you can measure it, then you can fix it, right? You can address it. So that is kind of I think that's a really good example of what we're all trying to do as sustainability professionals.
Absolutely.
I could add that to me, it's been very exciting to see the finance sector start to get a lot more involved in terms of requiring, or de facto requiring disclosure, and probably soon by the into next year there'll be some actual requirements for disclosing on environmental and social governance topics, which is a really big step in terms of getting these issues talked about in a financial lens, in terms of what risks and what the value is to opportunities and risks associated with these issues, particularly the climate change. But so that gives you a language to speak internally of, we have some real risks, and it's starting to become more clear what those costs are. But for us as a manufacturer that have some touch points with like retailers and end user customers that are quite large, I can speak to the actual value of being able to answer their questions and being able to position products in a more sustainable way, and like what the benefit is of doing that. And so when we're talking about like the ROI of like setting a target for renewable electricity or something like that, and like what's the ROI of an on-site solar array at our facility, there's the actual payback period, which can sometimes be a lot longer than your kind of traditional financial expectations, but you can layer on the intangible benefit of being able to answer or being able to show in a presentation, we have sustainable assets that we're deploying, and this makes your scope 3 emissions and your upstream supply chain lower. Like X company has goals and targets. Here's how we meet those. So there's like these additional levers of value that are starting to get a little clearer, more clear. Yeah, as time goes on and sustainability really grows as a maturing field. So I'm optimistic about that being less of a barrier in the future, but it's always still something that we have to address as projects come to the table.
Excellent. So we're rounding out to the end here, and I want to thank again our panel for their insight into their organizations and their organization's values. As we look at these as examples, we're seeing companies of significant size continuing to improve. And I think that also provides a pathway for smaller organizations to see opportunities within to improve their operations while reducing their impact on the environment, and still providing a significant profit motive along the way as well. We've seen other supportive industries help market these efforts so people can make smarter choices and support organizations as they make these investments into not only their future, but also our environmental impact. So again, thank everyone, our panelists, Garr, Michelle, Dylan, Kathy, for your support on this session. And I hope you all enjoy the end of our conference and the wise words wrapping us up in the last half hour of today. Thank you, everyone.